These pilots are insane. And you're flying below the tree line, and, of course, they're zigzagging. At some point, the helicopter levels off, and you jump out. And you have all of your gear made into a raft. So you and a buddy, you jump in pairs, have taken a poncho, put your rucksack and your weapons, and you make this poncho raft. And as it's still going, and this is usually at night, you throw and then one of you jumps, then the other, and you jump out and you head up, legs cross or together. And I did land sideways and ruptured my eardrum. Just brutal. It was good. And I'm underwater, and I'm coming up from the water. I could hear screaming. My name is Stephan Wolfert. I'm a military veteran. I enlisted as a medic in '86, became an infantry officer, got out in '92 because of a moment of crisis and seeing a Shakespeare play. Went to graduate school for acting, created a program called DeCruit, using Shakespeare to help mitigate the symptoms of trauma, or PTSD specifically, and then have since become a licensed psychotherapist.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Wisconsin, but I joined the Army to flee it, basically. So gives you an idea of how I've...
Was you a military family or no?
No, not at all. I suppose sort of the opposite. I don't know, not the opposite, but there's certainly the community. I'm from La Crosse, Wisconsin, and I'm specifically from the north side of La Crosse, Wisconsin, and at a particular time, right? So I don't know if it's that way anymore, because I've left in '86, and for the most part, I've been back, but not really. In those days, the north side was, the blue collar side. The south side was the more professional, where the doctors and professors and folks lived, and folks with the haves, as it were, as much as La Crosse has that. I mean, every place does, but still, to be wealthy in La Crosse is not, by comparison, anywhere else. It's very smallish city. I don't mean to, it's beautiful. There's amazing people there. I don't mean to begrudge it, but for me at the time, I never felt like I fit in. I just didn't fit in the community. I didn't feel, there's a big gap between me and my siblings. So I didn't feel like I ever really fit in the family.
Were you the youngest? Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What did your dad do for a living?
My dad was a health inspector for the state of Wisconsin, and my mother was a lab tech. She was started out as a phlebotomist, and then ended up running the laboratory at Lutheran Hospital in La Crosse. Yeah.
And what drew you to the military?
I don't know. I mean, how memory is. Hindsight, I suppose. Because now when I think about, jumping a little bit, when I look back and think that I was ever going to be anything but an actor, it's comical to me that I ever thought that there was some other option. Really, I mean, I memorized Steve Martin's entire album, Wild and Crazy Guy, and would perform it, alone for myself or for my sister if I could rope her into it. But yeah, I didn't. It was a way out. I'm a strange guy. I was a strange young man. I wanted to go to China to study at a Kung Fu temple for 10 years. And in fact, took 3.5 years of Mandarin Chinese to do so. But we were poor, and I couldn't. I had a back injury in high school, and so I had really poor grades. I missed a lot of school. I also just didn't, I'm not blaming it on that. I just wasn't in a place. Now I would have, well, I do in fact have multiple diagnoses after my name, but this alphabet soup, not just degrees, but diagnoses. So I just didn't do well at all. And then I went to 1.5 years of college, and I hated it. I absolutely hated it. I just couldn't thrive. I don't know. There was just a block there. And my only way out of La Crosse was the military. And the Army, in the '85, '86, they were desperate for people. So despite my back injury, they were like, do you have a pulse? And it was a joint center. So all of the, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines were all there. Coast Guard wasn't there at that time, but I don't think they were part of the armed forces at that particular time. But Actually, yeah, it doesn't matter. In the center, my memory, anyways, is just those four. And I kid you not, like the Navy, because Top Gun had come out, so the Navy had like a line. And then the next biggest line is like the Air Force. And then the next biggest line is the Marines. And then the Army is like cobwebs on the counter. Like, us. Yeah, come on over. Because it was post-Vietnam, it was still only, decade after Vietnam, a little over. And just no one was joining. And like I said, I think I mentioned to you before, the movies we had for the Army were like Stripes with Bill Murray and Private Benjamin. There wasn't this big motivation or not motivation, just didn't have a good name, which is good for me because that's how I got in.
And they talked you into being a medic. What did?
Well, I took the ASVAB. This was also fascinating too, because I never ever considered myself smart. I didn't, like I said, I didn't do well in school. But I took what's called the ASVAB. It's the entrance exam. And I scored really well. I mean, horribly on math. Like I still to this day, I'm horrible at math, but really well in science, biology. But on the ASVAB, I did well enough to where they suggested being a medic. I wanted to go infantry, but I was interested in being a medic. So I was like, yeah, cool. If I can fly, I wanted to be in the helicopters. I wanted to be a flight medic or a combat medic right within an infantry unit. And so that's how I went in that way first. I went to basic at Fort McClellan, Alabama, and which is, I think, is a NBC, nuclear, biological, and chemical. Like every Army post has a specialty, like Fort Benning's infantry. But almost all of them have basic training. So it doesn't matter what you're going into, it's where there's a slot available. And so I went to Fort McClellan, Alabama. And I don't know if you watched my show, but in Cry Havoc, I talk about it because it was true. I was so excited. I'm like, I'm going to see the world. And they sent me to Fort McClellan, Alabama. And it was just July for this Wisconsin boy who's Irish. I have two shades, transparent and blister. And so I'm in this horrendous heat, trying to thrive. And I did really well in basic, but then I went to advanced individual training in Texas, Fort Sam Houston, which is outside of San Antonio.
Go back to basic. Were you looking forward to going after you'd signed up?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, they would only let me join the reserves, again, because of my back injury. I had to sort of prove that I could make it through. Because there's something called MEPS, Military Entrance Processing, MEPPS. It's where you get accepted. Minneapolis, for me, that's where I had to go, being from La Crosse, Wisconsin. And I spent a week or more. I think it was more than a week, because I feel like I spent the weekend as well, trying to convince them that I wasn't joining to sue. And in fact, at one point, they had asked for my medical records. And so this is 86. So the fax machine was those silver rolls of that silver paper. Do you know what I'm talking about? That comes out and it comes out curly. You have to uncurl it, and it's so slow because it's a landline. And at one point, it had gone for like a day and a half, and they called me in, and I thought, oh, yay, they're going to tell me I'm in. And they said, can you tell Lutheran Hospital to stop sending your medical records because it's jammed up our fax machine? Because there were so many pages coming through. And they made me wait for days and days more. And I just sat at the MEP station all day, every day. And I guess, I don't know, I got the right person, or they got sick of me and wanted to get rid of me, but they cleared me for infantry, airborne, air assault, that kind of thing.
Does anything stand out in boot camp? What went on there?
Yeah, there was a lot, actually. I'm pretty hard on the military in my, like, the work that I do now. But there were, I always get asked that, were there any positives? And for me individually, I did love my drill sergeants. In particular, I wrote another show before my show Cry Havoc, my solo show. There was a play that I co-wrote with a friend, Brian Monahan, called Fit for Society. And in that, the narrator that takes us through is this drill sergeant of mine. I probably shouldn't say his name. You know what I mean? I don't know
Whatever.
if that's a thing or
it's
not.
okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
But he had a cleft palate, right? So the air escaping, that sound of, my day was there was cruelty, it had cruel names for it. And, and yet he got on, he was the first one that welcomed us on the bus. So there's like a couple of Snickers, but he had this booming, resonant voice that just it felt like it rattled the bus. He just, good afternoon, shut up. Just he started yelling, get off the bus, and it just echoed. And he would sing cadence, and he would, was our drill instructor, drill sergeant for the Army, and he was really influential to me. Like, he just, because I had this, 19-year-old judgmental, prejudiced kid that is meeting everyone from everywhere, and this drill sergeant with a cleft palate who's sang cadence. It was gorgeous. The way he sang cadence. I just loved when he got out there, and everything. Just this incredible voice and this courage, knowing that this bunch of 18-year-old knuckleheads are going to be making fun of him in the barracks, and yet there he was. And there he was, an NCO and a sergeant first class in the Army in a career. And then the other drill sergeant was 82nd Airborne. So yeah, it really lit me up. The other thing that was fascinating to me is I didn't find it all that difficult, which shocked me. And I mean, I was in shape. It's not that it wasn't challenging physically. It was, and the deprivation and the stress, the high intensity. I absolutely had my days of breaking. I don't mean it like I was coasted through, but it didn't quite meet my expectations. And my later reflection kind of influenced the work that I do now, that I do with veterans and have been doing for the last 2+ decades, because I realized that, and I mean this with love and respect, is like, my parents did the best they could. My brothers were doing the best they could. Everyone, no one meant any malice, but blue collar town, poor, a certain kind of culture that La Crosse and, the Wisconsin is in. It was violent. In my school, like there were daily, there were fights every day, and I was being, my brother felt like he was preparing me, and he was correct, that I'd be prepared for a fight always. Because, side note, anytime there's a fight, for whatever reason, I was always one of the guys first to be hit. Someone always swung on me. I must have a punchable face or something, but he did. He prepared me, but it was so violent that when I got to basic and they were just yelling at us, I thought, this ain't that bad. I've been yelled at my whole life.
Okay, so you went to AIT, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that was you said San Antonio. Yep. And what was that
Fort
like?
Sam Houston. It was great. It was, it was a big shift from basic training. You suddenly have, liberties. You can get weekend passes and go into town and do things, and it's more like a job. It was my first experience of what it would be like to be enlisted full time, and I was learning. I became, a combat medic is a high level EMT for civilian world, like an EMT emergency medical technician, at least intermediate. There's beginner, intermediate, and paramedic, if I recall correctly. But this was high level stuff. I mean, we were doing, especially where I got to train, I was doing stitches and intubation and really, injections and phlebotomy, drawing blood, just a lot of really high level stuff that I really, really loved it. And I maintained my medic training for, it had to be well over 10 years, but I feel like closer to 15 or so. Because even after I was an actor, I maintained it in different states that I went to. Yeah.
But you really enjoyed that aspect.
I did.
And then what happened after that then?
Well, I went to my reserve. I was asked, I was fortunate. In basic training, I was honor graduate, so I was #1 graduate for the company. And I don't mean that like, it's just, there's a lot of factors that go into it. There were people who were far better than me in different areas, especially like, I don't know, I didn't max the physical training test or anything. I think there's a lot of other reasons they did it. I was recruited to become an officer from then already. So they were already interested in me at that time. So I was asked to do active duty. I said yes, but they said, actually, we're going to send you back to school, ROTC, at UWL, where I left to join the Army to finish my degree so that I could become an officer in the infantry. And I begrudgingly did it. I was working them. I tried to go to West Point. They wouldn't accept me. I was trying to go anywhere else. And they said, nope, we need you to get those credits and get the hell out of there. We're sending you back just to get that degree. So I was in ROTC and the National Guard at the same time while I was in school. It was, yeah. I was taken aback by it, and I was constant. Go ahead.
No, and I would assume school was a lot easier at this point because you had confidence at this point. Or is that not true?
It was. Oh, absolutely. The other thing, the less important in reality, but more important to me was, I didn't really have a girlfriend in high school, and I didn't my first year and a half of college, and I didn't know. I had no game. I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't being hit on, nothing. But I came back to ROTC and I was suddenly a hit. And it was like, oh, and I don't know if it's just because there was new blood or what, but there was some talk. Like I was selected to do some really special things in ROTC. And one story I switched units. One quick story on that is I lived at the ROTC hall. I just loved it. I was studying. I was such a nerd. I was studying manuals. I'm supposed to be doing my history thesis, but I'm like, what's FM 22-5 say about this? And looking up all these things. And I hear down the hallway, the lieutenant colonel who runs the battalion commander of ROTC, Wolfert, sir. And I run out the hallway saying, get down here. And I see him standing next to another guy. And it turns out it would be my future company commander. It's this man, Captain Sullivan, who became one of my idols. He was looking for a new lieutenant, but he's looking for a cadet to fill it. And I go running down the hallway and I set attention, salute them both. He was at ease. And he looks at me up and down. He goes, I thought you'd be bigger. So then later I asked him, well, what was that about? Why the hell did you? He goes, no, there was so much hype. Like on paper, you're the stud, you're honor graduate and all these things I was going to, airborne, air assault. I had already gotten those. And he was like, I thought you'd be a bigger guy, more impressive. I became used to hearing that a lot.
At this point, are you thinking you're going to make a career in the military?
Yeah. At that point, I wanted to be out of the commissions for ROTC, and also I definitely from the minute I got there, I was like, I want to be active duty or regular Army. So you learn that, or I learned in ROTC that you get commissioned, but you either be Guard Reserves, which is what most of them are, or active duty, which is a small number, and an even smaller number get regular Army, which is in theory a career. You still have to get promoted, but you're kind of being signed on for a 20-year commitment. And I wanted that, and I got it. And then things happened, and that's when I started shifting.
It sounds like they saw real potential in you and were fast tracking that whole thing.
Yeah, they were. Yeah.
Just back up just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
The Army's still coming out of Vietnam, right?
Yeah.
It's still trying to recover from that. And so what was the vibe like? Did you get the sense they were trying to rebuild it, or, I mean, as a cadet then, or what was do you have a take on that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because there were other things that happened. And so one of my mentors, and there's a very limited amount I can say about this, but it sounds so covert, but I don't, not so much me, but the people, I can't mention names or any other details, but another one of my mentors, I talked about Captain Sullivan in the National Guard unit. But as I'm getting geared up for my regular Army commission, there was a master sergeant who was Special Forces that took me under his wing, and I got to do some really, really high-speed training. I was like I said, I got to go airborne, air assault. This is as an undergraduate in ROTC. And then pre-ranger school, light fighter academy, some really high-speed training. some other specialty stuff, and some of it under his wing. And he was introducing me to what's going on, what was happening in Central America at the time, what had already happened that I didn't know about, and this is before Panama, by the way. But I hadn't heard about the School of the Americas. And so then, I got to go to Fort Benning a number of times and work with School of the Americas or see their operations and learn about more of what they were doing in Central America. And and then for context, for anyone that knows that time in history, right around 88 was when I was getting my commission, 87, 88, end of 87, beginning of 88, if I recall correctly. And that's when the Iran-Contra affair, right? So Ali North perjured himself, and there was, and I'm hearing from one side the people who are actually doing the work, and then I see him testify, and there was some conflicts began to arise in me over everything that I was becoming exposed to, and really shifted. Because I thought that what you thought. I was really, I believed in American exceptionalism. I believed in that the function of the military was to support democracy, defend, and sometimes a good defense is a good offense, and I could wrap my mind around that. But and they we had God, what year was it? It was before I joined, but remember, like, Special Forces, and it was under Jimmy Carter, where the Special Forces team got wiped out before they even left the ground.
In Iran. Yep.
Yes.
Right.
And lo and behold, here we are. So they there was a real sense of, we're going to build up our special operations. They had created combined arms teams, which was a time only during when I was in, did that. I mean, they have it now, but it's a different look but we were pioneering it at that time. I worked with for example, I was in charge of a team that was more built like a ranger patrol, so 14 men, but I also had like a naval fist of artillery officer. Also had a couple of PJs. Do we have two? I can't remember, one or two pararescue from Air Force. Also had, the comptrollers from the Air Force. So this really just incredible team of elite soldiers from different branches coordinating to try it out, to see how it worked, to deploy and see what might happen, and where are the pitfalls. And so, they were more collaborative, the Army and all of the branches at that time, than they had been. It seemed like, I don't know, I didn't serve prior, but it certainly seemed like that was the orientation. That's what we're being told, is we want to be more like this, and we've learned from our mistakes, and and to make the most elite soldiers. Each branch was competing to make the most elite soldiers, Navy SEALs, and Air Force was the pararescue and comptrollers, and Marine Recon, Force Recon, and the Army had Rangers, Special Forces, and Delta, just to name a few. There's the 82nd Airborne, all that for 101st. But
okay, so let's go back. You finished up schooling.
Yeah.
You finished up the university and history.
Yeah.
What was your degree?
Yeah. My degree was in history, and I was originally evolutionary biology, but I had history as a minor. But then they sat me down and said, "Look, if you just do history, and just leave," because I was like, "Well, reverse it. We'll get evolutionary biology as a minor." They went, "Nope, we don't care about that. We need your degree." So I went history. But my history degree, my primary focus was guerrilla warfare. But at the time we called it irregular warfare. We were calling it it was more comprehensive. So it aligned with what I wanted to do in the military. I wanted to be a part of elite units that did irregular warfare, and then got the degree to kind of support, like, what does history say? How did Hannibal cross the Alps with elephants? Things like things that I felt were applicable to my future job.
So where did they send you after school?
Well, I stayed with the National Guard unit because, and I have great shame over this, I actually turned down my regular Army commission. So I turned that down, and I stayed in the National Guard unit. Although, I got to do some really amazing work, and not just, in the Guard unit and outside. I was put on temporary duty a lot. So I sort of pulled from the Guard unit to do other things. And then, And then I went to infantry officers basic course. It was right before, it was before Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait. But always felt like we knew it was going to happen because I had put off it's called IOBC, Infantry Officers Basic Course. I'd put it off a number of times and got to do some other really, really amazing training. And then started to doubt myself. I'm like, maybe I do want to go back in. I'm not sure. And then I got orders that said, nope, you're going on this date. There's no more delaying. You're going. And I was going IOBC and Ranger School right after was the slot. And while I was in IOBC is when he invaded. So then we started hearing about fast tracking to get us out to get ready. And there was, to some degree, there was some of that, as what I was hearing behind the scenes was we assumed it was going to get bogged down, right? And end up like what ended up in Afghanistan and Iraq and now Iran. But, Schwarzkopf and Powell, pretty effing genius. And it's 100 hours. So that first Gulf War was 100 hours and done. And then when I graduated, they left us in school. And when I got done, they offered me active duty again. And I had to really think about it. I thought about it for a number of months. I was going back and forth, but I had read Smedley Butler's speech, War is a Racket. It became a booklet. Smedley Butler, do you know who he is at all?
Yeah. What made you read that book?
Yeah.
How did you come across that?
Well, it was, I think I ended up reading it as a part of my degree, my history degree, if I'm not mistaken, or at least encountering him. That's a good question. It's foggy. I don't recall, but I read everything. Like I love reading, my approach was always read everything, right? We try to get both sides of any issue. I'm still that way. Like for example, I'm a Shakespeare actor, and there are friends who won't speak to me because I'll read everything about even the people who write about, was Shakespeare actually the author? So I'll read all those books. I find it really fascinating, but there are people who get really, really offended.
Right.
You're like, no, you can't even remotely think that way or read it. And so I've always been sort of that way. Now it makes sense. You bring up, pardon my ADHD for a moment, but it makes sense because I was forced to go to Catholic school. I hated it. I was begging to get out from like grade 1. And halfway through 7th grade, I got kicked out in 4th grade. And then my mother forced them to take me back. And halfway through 7th grade, they kicked me out. And the official, kick out letter, whatever you call it, said he asks too many questions. So that should give you a good idea as to how I found Smedley Butler's pamphlet on War is a Racket. But it deeply, deeply affected me, among many, many other things I was seeing, experiencing, reading that I had experienced in my temporary duty as well. And and it changed my belief in what we were doing. And so I left.
So you didn't actually sign in then? Officially, you just stayed in the reserves.
I stayed in the National Guard and did a lot of active duty, but it was all TDY. Yeah, it was all temporary duty. I also went to Joint Readiness Training Center in Arkansas, National Training Center in California.
How long were those things?
It wasn't JRTC. This aging sucks. I used to have a steel trap memory, and I remembered exactly. I don't remember. I think they must have each been around 2 weeks or so, 2 or 3 weeks. A rotation has to be in that ballpark, and no more than a month, certainly. But yeah, I did really well in those as well. I just
what would happen on those?
Or luck or what?
Yeah. Talk about those.
It's hardcore. JRTC and National Training Center has changed has become more focused because of Iraq and Afghanistan. But at the time, we were preparing for the Soviets and then the Russians, right? So that was our primary focus. It wasn't. I did work some irregular warfare and training in that as well. But the big thing was prepare for the Soviets. And so that was both JRTC and NTC. So JRTC in Arkansas was it Fort Chaffee, I think? You get there and it's right away. You hit the ground. And I went there as blue forces. So there's blue forces and op forces. The opposing forces are the bad guys. At JRTC, I went as blue forces, and in NTC, I was op forces. So we get there and it's right away. Like we flew in. Some get to jump in, some get to rappel in, and all that to insert. But it was brutal. I was put out on a forward advance team, and I was out in the woods with my team for, I don't know. Put it this way: we were drinking out of creeks and finding bad guys and attacking them and stealing their food. We were that far out. Like we couldn't. And so we lived like it was combat. It was brutal. I know it's training, but it's hard to accurately describe. And then National Training Center, we were OPFOR, which is kind of more desirable, but we were stacked up against the 82nd Airborne, 24th MEC, and 1st Cavalry Division. So it's units from them, not the full forces. But so it was every day, all day. You're deploying to fight, and if you're getting killed, you're recycling back out. We're inserting mostly all nighttime. In both cases, it was almost all nighttime ops. Learning to use, the MVG, night vision goggles were advancing pretty rapidly at that time. So we're also testing gear, new radios, SINGARs. So it was really, really high speed. I loved it.
How many guys were on your team when you did that?
I had, was it for both of them? I think, let me try to remember. At National Training Center, I had a reinforced platoon. So we were part of a Bravo Company, first of the 135th Infantry National Guard. And we were a reinforced platoon, because we were detached. So we had our own supply squad, our own supply platoon, rather, our own kitchen or, mess and all of that. So we operated like a small company. So we had quite a few more men than an average platoon, but we were part of a infantry company. And then at JRTC, I can't remember. I think I had a ranger type squad, which is 14 men. I feel like I could be wrong. Like you said, my memory is going.
Sounds like you really enjoyed doing those things, though.
I did.
Was it fun?
I did.
Grueling and fun?
I had a great time. Yeah. And made connections, because it is so grueling. Had connections. There's like my RTO, Reynolds, was, an amazing guy. There's so many guys you just, National Guard get a lot of shit. And this is really high speed unit, really high speed battalion overall. The battalion commander was, he's a Vietnam veteran. My platoon sergeant was a Vietnam veteran. The first sergeant was a Vietnam veteran. These are like high speed individuals, not a lot training to fight, and so that we can fight to kill was the motto, right? It wasn't sort of the stereotype. It wasn't stripes. It was amazing. And and I did love it. And I loved training. But I wasn't a very good officer when we weren't in the field.
What do you mean by that?
I wanted to be
protocol?
training.
It
it became like a job. For me, it became boring. And look, now, reflecting back and even near the end, I started to realize the importance of all of that. As an officer, you become sort of more of an administrator when you're not in the field. And that's the part I hated. I loved training. I loved small unit training. I loved small unit tactics. I loved the high speed shit. I didn't want to set up, the tables for chow. I didn't want to. I don't know. I'm trying to think of the mundane shit we had to do. Which there's a lot of it, especially in the infantry. And that's just where I didn't thrive, and I would fall behind on tasks, and I wasn't good at paperwork. And yeah, I just I didn't like it.
Previous to that, were they sending you down to South America? Were you going on some of those things?
Let's say no officially, just to kind of,
Yeah.
I don't want to be boring or even be like, try to be like I'm being, but just, no.
Did you do much medic stuff when you were in there? I mean, or was it
Well,
all once you
initially,
got started? They really started advancing you, so you really never stepped into that very much.
no, I did. So part of the transition, it was interesting. I was sent on a few temporary duty tasks as a medic. Because that was reserves at first. So it was reserves
Yeah.
in Minnesota. And I no sooner got to that unit than I did a winter training exercise. Then I got sent to, was it Winter Warfare Academy or Northern Warfare, some Arctic training. It was awful. That was awful. It was funny, but in some ways, in hindsight, but it was actually one of my favorite Army stories comes from that. But it was pretty brutal, below zero all day, every day, and sort of testing me. I realized in hindsight they were seeing where my limit was, and then they would send me to training that seemed like it was going to be an actual special operation I think to see if I would talk. That happened to me at Fort Sam Houston once. It happened to me when I was actually deployed for, in the reserves, you have a couple weeks a year minimum where you're doing annual training. You have your weekends, 1 weekend a month, but I kept getting sent to things routinely. And then I went to Fort Benning as a medic. I think it was Fort Benning, and a few other locations, Fort Bliss, I think, at one point. And then we'd fly. They'd get us in the C-130, and they'd swap out blank ammunition for live ammunition and do an in-air brief and switch the mission. And then you'd either jump in or land. And
so you're on the plane. They do that.
Yeah.
What's going through your head
Yeah.
when they're doing that?
Everything. Like what it's I was highly motivated. I thought that's what I really wanted. I was like, yeah. So I was jacked. I was absolutely up for it, and that's why I kept advancing. But there were times, I'd be lying if I didn't say there was another part of me going, wait, what the what? I mean, you're talking about possibly, dying here. This is real. It was one thing when it was training, and this is I'm human. I had those questions and those doubts, but the training was so great, and the people I was with, you learn to just push that down, let it come up later for you when you're out of the military. But which is why I created the work that I do.
You said that brought up one of your favorite Army stories. What's that story? Can you tell that?
Yeah, there was, so we were, I can't remember if we were in northern Minnesota or Alaska, but I think it was northern Minnesota. And, you're carrying, so I weighed about 155, 160 in these days. I was lean, and I would sometimes try to put on weight before Ranger School. I went to 165 to have something to lose, but I just, I trained hard and kind of couldn't keep it on. And I'm just a small frame guy. Anyways, I was only 5'10" and a half, and that's just kind of skinny wrists and what have you. Never a very bulky guy. And the weight we were carrying weighed out between 130. It was before you got some mission essential equipment. It was about 135 pounds of gear. And then you get you slap on a law and claymores and your ammunition. And now you're up in the 160s, right? So I'm carrying my body weight and if you get the M60, which I was insane. I loved that thing. I loved the M60 machine gun. So I would always volunteer to carry that if I could. It was the size of me, but I'm like, yeah, I'm tough. And I'd carry that. And plus it's sort of a morale booster, because the big guys always get it. And I would love taking it. And then the big guys would be like, I'll take it for the next patrol kind of thing to kind of get you, to get you some alliances. But it was authentic. Anyways, make a long story longer. We're going, and they gave us Jolly Ranchers that you you had sugar to burn, and they would issue us sticks of butter to melt in your to melt on your sterno and your little canteen cup, and we'd mix it with the hot chocolate from the MREs, the meals ready to eat. And when you bedded down in your Arctic sleeping bag, we weren't in any cover. We were learning all this, right? They're training us, like, how do you sleep at night? So we patrolled and like set up perimeter here, and you dig your pit and you make sure you have like your high. There's a lower point than you for the cold air to sink, that kind of thing, and a wind break because the wind was just rolling. But side note, it was also Northern Lights, so it was amazing. It was actually also really stunning at the time. You're like looking at these things, and so you're trying to do your job and melting your butter in the sterno and you know, drinking it. And I drank it because they warned us. They said if you don't do it, you won't be able to sleep more than like 45 minutes. And it was true to form. About 45 minutes, you guys would be waking up shivering. And so I was in my sleeping bag, and then they're like, "Get up, get the fuck up!" And they're waking us up. We're under attack, and that whole thing. You do a maneuver, and then sorry, grab your gear. The mission got to Charlie might continue the mission. And when they're saying get up, we noticed that when we got attacked, there was one guy that just stayed in his sleeping bag, and I didn't know. I thought it was like planned, you know, maybe he was supposed to be a casualty or something. And I kept my medic training. We had a medic, but I kept my medic training, so I was excited. Thought I was going to get to do it, and I realized, oh, that's a guy sleeping. And I remember the guy. This is like this first or second night. I'm talking like we're in these horrible conditions, and it's a guy from I think it was Alabama. He was from the South. He had never seen snow. He was also like one of the only black guys in this super white unit, and he's in the sleeping bag. And he was asking about it before we got to the field. He's like, "Is it bad?" And I'm like, I wish I could tell you that it's not, but it's mind over matter, but it's awful. And he's in his bag, and the cadres start yelling at him. They're like, "You get the fuck up, or get." They're kicking him. That's what they're kicking him. And he had a little T-shirt over it because you have to keep your mouth outside the sleeping bag, otherwise all the moisture from your aspiration gets in the sleeping bag. So he's had a T-shirt there, and it's frozen. You can just see the puffs of steam, and they rip that off, and you can see his face, just like this much of his face, right? And they're yelling at him like, "Get up! You got to get the fuck out! Get out of there!" And his little face just went, "Mm-mm." Just made a little shake of the head, and you could just faintly hear him go, "Mm-mm." And they're like, "You got to get up!" And he's like, "Mm-mm." And the next thing they're yelling at him, they go, "If you don't get up, you're out. We're kicking you out." And you just see a little smile break out on his face. And they said, "All right, you're out. You're out. You got to take all your gear and you go to that deuce and a half." That was like, and it was a good ways off. He gets up in his sleeping bag, looks around, looks at where it is, looks at his gear, reaches his arm out the armhole, grabs his rucksack, and starts hopping in his sleeping bag all the way to the deuce and a half. And every once in a while, he'd pull his head out and look, and then hop, and stayed in that sleeping bag all the way up into the back of the deuce and a half. And the best part was when he got in and drove away, we all looked at each other and said, you can quit? Like it was a foreign concept to us. You can just go, "No, this sucks." So yeah. Anyways, that was.
Did you have any what you call scary moments when you were doing stuff?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Give me a couple
tons.
of those.
You just want to go right for the yeah.
Yeah, why not?
I suppose. Yeah. I'll share what I can. There was some really awful things. I had scary and awful. In National Training Center, I had a dear friend get killed in a live fire training exercise. So it wasn't even, it wasn't even. That's what sucked. I mean, it sucked.
What happened there?
It wasn't. It was on live fire training for Bradleys, and all I can say about it is one of the Bradleys mistook one of the observer controller vehicles, which is at the time in 113 APC, as a target in the confusion. It was someone who was filling and shouldn't have been on the gun, and he fired, and we got hit, and he was killed, and that broke me. Because then, the funeral, I remember the speech. This happened to us. So in 1 year, I had that happen. at National Training Center, but I also had one of my soldiers take their own life. And I had two in the company, but this one was directly under my command. And we was a different training. This wasn't not NTC or JRTC, but I had a driver at this point because I think I was an XO or something, an executive officer for the company, right below the company commander. And there's a lot of competition amongst officers, right? We're competing for slots because there's only so many slots. It's a pyramid, like it's less, you got to be top notch. And he left our Jeep. He was my driver, and he left it unsecured. He didn't chain it up. So I didn't know this at the time, but one of my competing officers had stolen it, or someone in his platoon or something. There was a guy that we just hated each other's guts, openly anyways. And like in one of our training things, using blanks with with the Miles gear, it was like laser tag basically, but with our actual weapons. Like he shot me he fragged me in one of the training things. Is that kind of guy, a real piece of work. Anyways, and he hated me, and I'm sure he has very, very valid reasons for hating my guts because I was a bit of an asshole. But anyways, my driver left the Jeep unsecured, and it got stolen. And when it got recovered, the shit rolls downhill. So my company commander laid into me with good reason, because that's the way it works. And then I laid into him, and I was really good at it this time. I feel like all of my childhood shit could get funneled into the military. Like it was really, and I was learning from who I idolized. And so I was going to go in. You learn that you better be going harder after the people under you than what happened above you. It's got to get more intense. And so I laid into them. And the next morning, there were MPs waiting, and a company commander called me in the office, and there were MPs there. And I got to tell you, I barely remember most of this. I'll tell you like the bits I remember, and some was filled in for me afterwards. But I remember going in and thinking the MPs were there about the Jeep, because it is a chargeable offense that I left that, and I'm responsible for it ultimately. So I thought it was about that. I thought it was about the Jeep getting stolen, or I was going to get busted or something. And they slid a note in like evidence, like plastic. I didn't realize at the time it was like evidence material or something like, but it was in plastic, and it had red on. It was like pink and some other stuff. And I'm looking at it. I'm like, what am I reading? And I remember my heart pounding in my head, trying to comprehend what I couldn't even really, wasn't processing what I was reading. And I just said to the commander, what is this? And he told me that my driver had taken his own life, and he wrote a suicide note, and he wrote me in it that he had let me down, and it impacted him so that he couldn't live with himself. And so he took his own life. That absolutely, gutted me. And my commander and my mentor that I mentioned, the master sergeant from Special Forces, they tried to get me right, but that was one between that and my other buddy. It was, and everything, right? It was just all the fractures were starting to join into one gigantic fracture, and I was done. And what really sealed it was, in both cases for the funeral, it was the funeral speech. I remember, they say there's sort of each branch has a slightly different one, but it's, as you're handing the flag over to the family member, you say, on behalf of the President of the United States and a grateful nation, we present you with this token of our appreciation for your loved one's faithful and honorable service. And then you hand it over. And I just remember, that word honor striking to my core, and just thinking, what was honor? Like, where's the honor in this? I don't, how did that happen? This isn't even in the field. Like in the field, I could somehow wrap my mind around the insanity of it all, and just write it off as, well, it's chaos, right? War is chaos. And it doesn't make any sense. It just flat out doesn't. So don't try to make meaning out of it. But I could not make meaning of two amazing people dying in not in combat. So, and
were they close together? Those two, Those two incidents?
Yeah. My recollection, at least my memory is like within months. It was within the same year. It was within 6 months. And it was right at the time I was also, like I said, I was being offered to go back on active duty. It was like the third time I'd been approached to go back on active duty, and said, okay. And I was at that time, I said yes again. And then this happened, and I couldn't take it.
And then you said you felt people started putting pressure on you because I think they'd seen potential in you to.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I am. So when one of those incidents happened, I actually went, technically I was AWOL. I lost it. I mean, I realize now what it was. I was quite literally in a PTS episode. Wasn't a like psychotic episode. I mean, I suppose it could be arguably considered that, but I wasn't hallucinating. I just had broken, and I didn't have any reason, higher reasoning skills. But fortunately, the first sergeant, like I said, was a Vietnam veteran, and my platoon sergeant at the time was a Vietnam veteran, the detachment sergeant, and they knew what was going on. They were like, they'd seen this before, they'd experienced this before, so they were kind of covering for me. And I got a rail pass on Amtrak and just hopped on the Amtrak with my rucksack, change of clothes, some essentials, water, and a cooler. And in the cooler, I kept beer first, ice, and then on top of that, bread and peanut butter. So it was just like the bare essentials. And on the train, and I just sat, I would stay in either the bar car, or sometimes they'd have like the viewing car, not all the time, but, and I would just look, and I just remember I'd just be staring out the window for hours and hours and hours, and drinking and eating occasionally. And then when we'd stop, I'd hop off. And where I was going was from Chicago to it splits up in Washington and goes down along the California coast to Arizona and then back to Chicago. And so I took that whole journey, and I checked in with them a couple times. But one of the things was because with the rail pass, you could hop off for as long as you want and hop back on. It could be days or weeks. And so in Montana, it was and I talk about this in my solo show, and it's a true story that as we're climbing from the east side of the Rocky Mountains, as you're going up and up and up and up into Montana towards the Continental Divide, the train just slows and slows and slows in the wood. You get in the trees, and you're up in the mountain air. And it was at night, and there was a full moon, so you could see absolutely perfectly. So but I couldn't, the light. There was still enough light in the car where I couldn't see out the window. So I ran in between the cars, and I'm looking, and I was there for a really long time. But then I got really upset that I could only see like this much between the cars, and so I looked. And I thought, yeah, I could do it. And I hopped up on top of the train, and I sat on top of the train, just taking this all in. And it was, I'm an atheist, but it was the closest thing at that time that I had to sort of a religious experience, if you will. Some sort of thing shifted in me. I call it more of a catharsis, my first catharsis. And I decided wherever this thing stops next, I'm hopping off. And it stopped at Whitefish, Montana, just before sunrise, like right before. So I hopped off, and I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what town. I didn't know anything about it. And as the sun came up, I just sat at the station. I just remember the smells, and knowing now what I know, all the decades I've done of mental health work, my own work, and working with others, I know the power of smells in terms of post-traumatic stress disorder in particular. And one of the things that was getting me was the diesel exhaust from the train. And I realize that now. So I loved when it was turning, and I could smell the trees and the leaves and the earth and the bark, like some of the, it was just so potent. So when I hopped off, I'm sitting on this bench in Whitefish, and I'm watching the sun come up, and there's like this gigantic, the mountain range is right there, and this big ski mountain, with everything on it. And I know it's an old joke because I say it in my show, but it's the truth. Is I was looking at this big mountain, wondering, God, I wonder what it's called, and its name is Big Mountain. So how wonderfully named. That's the perfect name for it. And I traveled around Montana. I went down to a place called Big Fork that's gorgeous around Flathead Lake. And I was journeying around, but I was completely obliterated at this point. Something had kind of activated. But I ended up somewhere in Montana. It was in western Montana, in that area. I saw Shakespeare's Richard III. And for context, I had never, ever been to a Shakespeare play. I don't recall reading it or seeing it, and I just didn't come from that kind of family, community, or background. And I mean, there were theater people, but in my high school, for example. But I was, and this is the truth, I was never brave enough to fully lean in and be friends with them because I was a worrier, worried about like what would people say and that kind of thing. And but I went to it. And just for folks who don't know that, so the way Shakespeare's Richard III begins is a guy walks out in full uniform, military uniform, and opens up with, they call it in Shakespeare a soliloquy, an opening monologue that not only sets the tone, but is, sort of a narration, but only the way Shakespeare does it, which is just a whole other level. But what this guy, and the powerful thing that I wasn't prepared for is Shakespeare's play are direct audience address. So this guy's looking directly at us. And I felt like, I was unsettled by this because I felt like he was looking at me, not really realizing, oh, I'm in the dark. He can't see me. He's just looking out. But he's giving the opening speech. And in that opening speech, now is the winter of our discontent is one of the more famous lines in Shakespeare, but that's the opening line. And in that speech, he's saying, we're at peace. Hooray, the war is over, and we've hung up our weapons for monuments. We're no longer riding, and I'm transposing in my own mind. He's talking about steeds or horses. I'm thinking helicopters, Black Hawk helicopters. I can hear as he's saying this. I know what he's saying somehow, and he said, and so hooray, there's no more war. But I'm not made for peace. I'm deformed. And even though he's talking about his physical deformities, for me, I could tell I was fucked up. I knew something was wrong. Meanwhile, I'm having this inner fight because I thought I don't deserve to be fucked up. I remember thinking and saying that because I wasn't in Vietnam. I didn't do anything impressive. I wasn't, and all the folks who went to year-long tours and multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, I didn't do any of that. So why would I be fucked up? But I knew I was, and I knew that I was angry, and I knew that I was volatile, and I knew that I had a hair trigger, and my berserker would just come out in a moment's notice, and sometimes unpredictably, and that I hated fireworks, and all of these things, and that's what he's saying, and I identified with him, and it was so powerful that I remember during his speech heaving, crying, and I come from family where you don't show emotion, in the community, so I'm like literally have my hand clasped over my own mouth to try and silence me. And I remember trembling and almost vomiting and feeling my body shake and having this just physiological experience that I realized later would be termed, the Greeks would have called, the ancient Greek theater, they would call this a catharsis, that something's opening up in me. And that so profoundly affected me that even though I continued my journey on that rail pass, I eventually, when I got back, I said I'm out, and I was going to go to graduate school for acting. But they so my company commander came to visit me to convince me to come back. A buddy of mine from ROTC, the master sergeant that I was talking about, and another dear friend of mine that I'd served both in ROTC and TDY, a lot of training together. We're still good friends, but all four of them were sent to convince me to come back. Yeah.
What would they say?
So it was tough.
What did they say to you?
Well, Captain Sullivan showed up. Oh God, I hope it. He was major when he got out, I believe. I should have been a colonel. He was amazing. He's still alive, I imagine, but I don't talk to him. I have so much shame that I stopped talking to most of the folks. But there's a knock on my door, and Captain Sullivan, I open the door, and Captain Sullivan's standing there with a 6-pack of Dos Equis, and in these days it was VHS tapes of Zulu. and which is the movie with about Rorke's Drift, right, on the continent of Africa, against Zulu, the British colonial military against Zulu warriors. And and by the way, the significance of the Dos Equis was it was Clint Eastwood's favorite beer. At least that's what we believed. So he had those two things. He had those. I went, Captain Sullivan, he goes, I'm here to reinstate your manhood. And it was like, oh man. Fuck. It was tough. But yeah, I couldn't go back.
Did he put the movie in?
Yeah, we watched the movie for about the 15th time or more. Yeah.
And did you tell him to his face when you left that you weren't going to go back in? So that's a lot of pressure.
And the other guys too. It is.
Yeah.
It is. And one of the guys came to visit me when I was in Montana. So when I said I was left for graduate school, I'm truncating time. I take Shakespeare's license. He does that a lot. Because I actually went back to Montana, to Whitefish, to snowboard for 2 years. My plan was
a spectacular place, by the way. That place is beautiful.
Right? It's unique and spectacular is a perfect word for it. So yeah, I like washed dishes at night and like did night audit and things so that I could snowboard during the day. And I just did whatever job I could get at the Alpine Lodge, which has now been destroyed. But a great community there, small. What's so great about Big Mountain is it's a smaller lodge. It's not one of the bigger, it wasn't, the tourists were mostly from Canada because it's so close to the Canadian border and the Canadian dollar went so far then. So my one buddy came out, or two, actually both of them came to visit me there and to convince me to come back. And my one friend is the one who taught me to snowboard. So he showed up and he goes, I'm here to convince you to come back. I've been sent to convince you to come back. And he goes, and I've been given, if I recall correctly, he said, I've been given a month to do it. It was 2 weeks or a month. It was a long time. And I was like, he goes, so are you coming back? I said, no, man, I can't, no, I'm broke. And he goes, okay, let's go get me a snowboard and let's just snowboard for a month. And so he did kind of try to convince me some more as we went. But overall, he was very respectful. He understood. He got it. He had been active duty before he went to ROTC and he was an MP and really, really kick-ass soldier.
Were they getting pressure to do that?
Apparently, yeah. They never really told me, but they said they were sent to come convince me to come back.
Wow. And you said something about Ranger School. Did you do Ranger School, or did they want you to do Ranger School? You did.
I did pre-Ranger, and then I went to Ranger School right after Infantry Officer's Basic Course. I didn't.
Where was that? Where's that?
Get my tab. It's goes to 4 places, but it starts and ends in Fort Benning, Georgia.
Okay.
Then you go to Delanago for mountain phase, and then in those days we went to Fort Bliss, Texas for desert, and then you go to Florida for jungle phase. So there's 4 different phases: city phase, mountain phase, desert phase, and jungle phase. And I was golden. I actually was already, so you get a set number of patrols or leadership positions, and because there's so many of us. So there's the opening day is, it's brutal. You have the worm pit, which is an obstacle course through mud and screaming, and there's different, at each thing you have to qualify, like you have to do 10 pull-ups while you're wet and muddy. And it was in January, so it was winter Ranger School, and it was brutal. But I'd been in shape. I'd been through IOBC and Light Fighter Academy. So I was fairly, certain I could get through it. We'd gotten through city phase and we were in jungle phase, and I already had 2 leadership goes. So you get 2. You can get 1 if I recall correctly. Correct me and anyone in the comments, but if I'm not mistaken, you get 2 leadership positions, and if you pass both, you're golden. You really just kind of got to stay awake and make it through. And I'd been through this level of training pretty consistently up to that point. And I had my 2 leadership positions already. And I keep in mind, I'd spent what's called the Gulag. I'd spent a month in the Gulag. I should back up.
Yeah.
So the day 1, you take the APTFT, the Army physical fitness test. Then you go to the worm pit and these other things. And that's push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, 2-mile run. And I always had trouble with push-ups. However, when I maxed everything else out, but when I was doing the push-ups, I noticed they're going 1, 1, 1, and I will say that like I have the kind of arms, they call them carrier arms, where I have to snap because they don't straighten, so I have to kind of snap. But I was ready, man. I could do the most push-ups I ever could do. But my last name is Wolfert, and I noticed from about letter S. Because we were lined up alphabetically. So from letter S, all of a sudden they're failing. And I'm seeing that platoon for the gulag grow and grow. I failed the physical fitness test, me and everyone from the letter S to Z. And you spend 4 weeks in what they call the gulag, which is where you work. I mean, you just work out. You're labor, but you're also just, you wear an armband that shows what you failed at. So anytime a cadre sees you, they're like, drop, and you have to do whatever you failed at. And for me, it was push-ups. So then when we got to the APTFT the next time, I was front-loaded because we came from the gulag. I wasn't in the back anymore. And burned right through it. Worm pit, got a thing at City Phase, got a second one. And then we were doing hand-to-hand combat, and I got lined up with a really good buddy of mine. We were in IOBC together, but he was a National Division I wrestler. So just wide, and you got to get tested out, right? So I throw him and I do it, and he's bigger. So he's probably throwing himself for me, because I'm trying to do this shit. He's a pretty jacked guy. And it comes time for him, and I don't remember a thing, but apparently when he threw me, he right on my head. And I was apparently like stiff as like straight on my head and then flopped to the side. And I just remember hearing someone snoring and wondering what it was, and realized it was me breathing and coming to. And I pop up to pretend like that's the joke at Ranger School, right? I wasn't sleeping. And so I pop up, but I really thought when you go unconscious, you're not even aware you did. And so yeah, I hopped up and they sent me to the medic, and I was ruled, I didn't want to, but I started vomiting and I was ruled with a concussion, and I was like, nope, I'm going because I'm golden. There's no way I'm leaving. But they kicked me out for the concussion. I had to go to the hospital. I spent like a week in the hospital. I couldn't even fly back to my unit. I had to take ground transport because my brain was so swollen. I guess my pupils were like this. There was like one huge one. But yeah, I was determined. It's still a thorn in my side that I didn't get my tab, because I wanted airborne, air assault, which I got, Ranger, and ultimately Special Forces. But I could have been fine with Special Forces not being there because I left. But the Ranger tab was in my grasp, and eats me.
What was in your time in there? What was the most exciting thing you did that?
I don't know. I think there was a particular summer. So it kind of depends. Look, I loved the thing that pops to mind was one particular summer I finished school. And I feel like it was the day after my last exam, I went to airborne school. I went straight from airborne school to air assault school. Past both of those, went straight from those to basic camp, which is advanced camp, ROTC's final raiding camp. And it's like 6-week thing in Fort Lewis, Washington, which was really fun, really great time. In all 3 of those, to do that summer, those 3 back-to-back trainings and I did really well. Like there's a score of 5 to 1, right, throughout your platoon. And they only give 2 5s per platoon, and I was one of the 5s. So that's why I got the regular Army commission. So it was a great summer. I got airborne qualified, air assault qualified, got to jump out of airplanes, got to jump out of helicopters, got to do helo casting. Really incredible shit.
Describe that. What's that like? Tell me about that.
The helo casting is, so you get in a helicopter and it flies along the water, either offshore of the ocean or along a river, where the helicopter and where we were doing it. And so I got to do quite a bit after air assault as well, after the training. But you fly below the tree line. And these pilots are insane. And you're flying below the tree line, and of course they're zigzagging and everything, taking the maneuvers. You know the term I'm trying to say. Maneuvers
Banking?
to avoid contact.
Yeah.
But evasive maneuvers.
Evading, yeah.
And at some point, the helicopter levels off, and you jump out. And you have all of your gear made into a raft. So you and a buddy, you jump in pairs, have taken a poncho, put your rucksack and your weapons, and you make this poncho raft. And as it's still going, and this is usually at night, you throw you're just waiting for the load, the commander and the load master, and you go, boom, or crew chief, throw the raft, and then one of you jumps, then the other, and you jump out, and you head up, legs cross or together, crossed, if I'm not mistaken. Unlike airborne school, where they're together but not crossed, and your arms tight, because you don't know how you're going to land. And I did, in fact, land sideways and ruptured my eardrum one time. Just brutal. Another concussion, but I didn't tell anyone. I just stayed in and didn't tell them. But we had one guy land on shore and break his femur once too. It was, and I'm underwater, and I'm coming up from the water. I could hear screaming, and my ear hurt so badly I fell back under the water because they had told us to go too soon, and we were way too high. We were something like 35 feet, traveling at like 20, 25 knots or something like that, maybe 30 knots. And so some of the rafts broke apart when they hit. So like M16s were at the bottom of the river. It was brutal. And but anyways, but I said it was fun, but it actually was fun. And then once you're in, the idea is you insert, because they don't know where you got out of the helicopter, the enemy. So then you go to shore and you get your gear out and you rally it, you meet up, you rendezvous, and then you continue mission. And that was fun shit. Parachuting was fun.
What's
shit.
air assault? What is that one?
That was air assault. That's what I'm talking about.
That's air assault. Oh, that's air assault.
Yeah, airborne is parachuting. That's out of aircraft.
Yeah.
And airborne is, air assault is you rappel out of a helicopter. You do, you also do we didn't do them in those days, but now they do the other
rope,
static line. Yeah, just the single line where you descend down. I forget what they call it. We rappelled out, and then helo casting, and you also learn sling loading. So you have to memorize. It was academically challenging, which is what I loved about it. Like airborne is just physical. Not just, but mostly physical, and a rite of passage, 3-week rite of passage. Air assault is academically challenging. You have to memorize every helicopter, its load capacity, like how many pounds it can lift in different climates and different weather and different altitudes. We plan sling loads underneath. We rig up Jeeps and Humvees and things under Chinooks and Blackhawks, and also loading up people. I have to learn like what's the max a UH-1 can take versus UH-60, and the temperature and the humidity, all that. Really, really fun stuff. Yeah. It was, and then you guide them in. Like you're on the radio. You set up the landing zone. You have to choose landing zones, which is a bit like what Pathfinders do, which is something I always wanted to do. But you have to pick the LZ. You mark it, and then you're on the radio directly with the pilots, which I loved. There's no intermediary, and they're coming in, and it was great fun. That part of it, I loved it.
Okay, so you told everybody no. You took a couple of years. You went back to school then?
Well, not till quite a bit. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I was jumping in time. I went to graduate school to become a classically trained actor. So I got my Master of Fine Arts in Rhode Island at Rhode Island College. Excuse me, in Rhode Island.
Well, I want to back up too, and I'm going to tie all this back together to this. But what did your parents think when you joined? What did your dad think when you joined the military? Originally,
it turns out my dad didn't really like it. Neither one of them did. I ended up, I didn't realize how strongly my dad felt about it until I got out of the Army. And we didn't talk all that much. But he was a man of few words, and with me anyways. And so I remember him telling me, "I'm really glad that you got out." And that was Yeah, it was kind of shocking to me because I didn't, my side of our relationship was estranged. I was sort of a feral child, there was such a big gap between me and my siblings. And my parents had, they had been through it. They had 4 kids in the age of nothing's reusable, right? Or, sorry, nothing's right. It's the bottles, the diapers, it's
Yeah.
all. And my dad was gone a lot for his work. So my mom's raising 4 kids alone. She had had a medical emergency before me with one of the earlier pregnancies. So, and then when I was very young, she got hepatitis as a phlebotomist. A test tube broke in her hand and she got hepatitis and they sent her home to die. It was a really, it didn't feel like my upbringing was about me whatsoever. My sister basically raised me. I was also sort of feral. I just learned how to take care of myself, and I had to kind of caregive for her at a very young age because the kid, my siblings went to school, my dad went to work, and she was laying there and she couldn't even, she couldn't get up a lot of days. So yeah, when I joined the Army, for me, it was, cutting ahead to when I was 18, for me, it was, I'm getting the hell out of here. I hate it. No one cares anyways. But unfortunately, the Army sent one of the letters or some paperwork to their address, unbeknownst to me. So they had my orders and they knew when I was going to be at the Greyhound station to ride the dog to Minneapolis, to then fly to Fort McClellan. And yeah, so they showed up to try and beg me to not go. My mother was begging me not to go. Again, I don't blame them because this is their Vietnam era folks. And they're saying, don't go, don't go, don't go. But I went. And to their credit, they came to when I graduated basic training because I was an honor graduate. They actually came to it. So it was really, I don't know. For me, it was kind of like, does not compute. I don't understand. I didn't think you guys even knew I existed or cared. It was my narrative for them. And so, yeah.
It's okay. So now jump. So you went back to school, and then what did you do after that?
Well,
when did you write? When did you start writing your plays and stuff? When did you do that?
In what became Cry Havoc began as my graduate thesis. So when I got accepted to school, I was accepted to a conservatory. It literally just closed a few years ago. It ran for 30 years. I was so sad about it. It's called Trinity Rep Conservatory. I wanted a conservatory because it's like you can think of like the theater army, if you will, because it's immersive, right? It's 3 years, day and night, like you're doing 14-hour days, weekends, holiday, like it's not like other school. And I wanted that. It was also housed at a professional theater company called Trinity Repertory Company in Providence, Rhode Island, a really well-established, well-regarded resident theater company. And there weren't many left in the country at that time. So that was my favorite choice. And somehow they let me in, which is astonishing because I had virtually no actor training. And it was grad school. You're supposed to come in with like a undergrad degree, professional experience. So when I got in, I knew you had to do a final performance piece and write a thesis. And I knew I wanted to do Richard III, have the play cut down to the maximum allowed time, which was 45 minutes. And I knew I wanted to insert my own story interwoven with Shakespeare. I knew it before I got into grad school. So I was working on it the full 3 years up until my final performance. But it was inverted. My Cry Havoc is my story with Shakespeare. This one was Shakespeare with my stories inserted.
Right.
Plus like the song from Les Mis, One Day More, was actually the finale. Like it was off the rails. But the reason is because what Shakespeare did for me, and I knew this even before, this is why I wanted to go to graduate school, and what graduate school did for me was there was something medicinal, borrowing Yvette Nolan's term, but something medicinal about theater and something medicinal about Shakespeare's verse. There was something that when I was on stage, it was the only time I felt grounded, still, present, and in my body and in that immediate moment, which is right. What a paradox, because you're on stage in public, like perform, right? Should be all the stage fright. You would think it would be the opposite, but it was the rhythm of the verse, the breath in it, the camaraderie that's in an ensemble, a theater ensemble piece, because they're there for you. If you're there for each other. There's that same kind of camaraderie. We're doing Shakespeare, who writes about veterans brilliantly, like nobody else. And it's direct audience address. So I feel engaged. I never enjoyed the fourth wall type theater. I mean, I did it, but it was never my favorite. I love that direct audience, to be able to connect with everyone in the space. Let's not pretend they're not there. Let's everyone talk about this and talk about our
It's
humanity.
oddly, Stephan, that sounds just like the military, though, right?
It is.
Camaraderie.
It is.
In the
Yes.
moment.
Yes.
You have to be in your present, because if you're not
Yes.
present, something bad's going to happen. Very interesting.
That's right. Yeah, they're so aligned. And in fact, I mean, this wasn't my area of expertise, but in graduate school, I learned this, and there's quite a few people who specialize in this area. But the ancient Greeks were all military. The way the ancient Greeks processed their war trauma was through theater, and the playwrights and actors were either cadets, active service members, or military veterans. The audience was either cadets, service members, veterans, or family of the three. And so it was woven in their fabric. And this is where we get the term catharsis from, where they would put plays on stage with singing and music and movement and themes that were discussing what it's like to lose a loved one in war, what it's like to be at war as a community, written by people who had been there. Aeschylus was, he's just to name one, was a veteran of the Battle of Marathon, and a sea battle, the Simonides, I can't remember the name of it. Not my area, I'm more Shakespeare. But, this guy had been through some of the most horrific battles of the war between the Greeks and the Persians, and he's processing it through theater. So this is an, ancient way we've done it. And like I said, I went to LA to study with Randy and eventually Yvette Nolan from 2003 on, 2004, to be able to observe how the indigenous community openly embrace theater as medicine, because that's what it was doing for me. That's what I felt. That's what was happening for me and other people. I had a classmate in grad school who had a condition, because I don't want to name it necessarily, but he had a neurological condition that when he was on stage, we talked about this all the time, where for him the same thing happened. When he was on stage in a play, applying the training of classical actor training, all of his stuff, his tics went away. All these other things would fall away. And so, yeah, they're very closely aligned. They both rely on breath, rhythm, community, and language. So that's sort of been my thesis since 93 on how they overlap, and use that to either wire for war, or as we use theater, to unwire from war, and through using the principles of classical actor training.
So you've been doing that for how long now, would you say?
Well, I would say, 90. So I saw the play in, I think it was 92, and became obsessed and started reading and taking acting lessons then. And it was in Shakespeare. But I started graduate school in 96 and got a firm grip on what I was doing about 97, knew what I was trying to, or had a better understanding. And then 2003 is when I started forming my first nonprofit. Initially, it was called the Veteran Center for the Performing Arts. I wanted to just call it Shakespeare and Veterans, but I listened to people. Anyone listening to this, don't listen to other people. I regretted it. I made this Veteran Center for the Performing Arts. Well, we were a small little theater. It was beautiful. This brilliant, amazing guy in Los Angeles Jared Lazan owned a furniture store and gave us like square footage that's thousands of dollars a square foot to turn his storeroom into a theater, where I held free classes for veterans all week long, and then performances on the weekends, interweaving professional actors with veterans to begin this, what became my program that I co-created called DeCruit, which was, I understood what it was doing for me, but I couldn't name it. I couldn't formulate it. So I started working with other veterans to see what was their take on it. And we were very open and experimental about it. Like, we're like, what are the limits? What doesn't work? And when we got going, we started understanding, no, it's the verse. It's Shakespeare, because we were doing full plays, right? We were putting up, and that's a lot of resources and a lot of work
for sure.
but my wife, and I was writing Cry Havoc at the same time. I'd taken my graduate thesis and was rewriting it and doing sort of workshop performances. And my wife came to one of the classes. She was basically funding our nonprofit because she was working poor thing, for both our nonprofit and holding down a full-time job, but in LA. And she came to it, and what I was doing was, with the veterans, I was doing what I did for me, which was I took a Shakespeare monologue, and rather than I took it out of the context of Shakespeare's play and tried to understand, what is it for me? How does it relate to my life? So I was writing, Cry Havoc is the way I understand the transition period, or what I say is, we're recruited but not decruited, right? We don't have the same comparable transition out as we do going in. We don't have the same resources, testing, training, and care. And so in that process, as I'm helping veterans do that through theater, we're using Shakespeare's text because he writes veterans so brilliantly. And what I would do is give them writing prompts, and started learning that certain Shakespeare monologues tended to go with certain themes, like insomnia or describing PTSD. Well, Lady Percy, one of Shakespeare's spouses of a military service member, perfectly describes post-traumatic stress disorder, like to the letter, 400 years before we even have the diagnosis. Jonathan Shea wrote it. I first read about it with Jonathan Shea. He wrote a book called Achilles in Vietnam, and he laid it out. And I'm like, yes, that's it. That's exactly what I'm experiencing. And then, that transition that I talked about, like, we're at peace, or I'm out of the military, but I'm at war internally. Well, give them Richard III's Now is the Winter of Our Discontent, and they get to have someone else's words at this heightened level, because it's poetry and it demands so much to be spoken. And breathing in, because it's in verse, we breathe in before each new line. So the veterans not only get to find language for something that they have previously found indescribable, but they get a rhythm that's in the natural rhythm of trauma, by the way, which I'll mention in a minute. But more importantly, if we honor Shakespeare's verse and breathe in before each new line, what they're doing is they're helping to regulate their central nervous system, even though they're discussing things that are life and death to them. And what we know about trauma is that it's not just a bad memory. It's a re-experiencing of the event. So they're reliving it, but for perhaps the first time, they're managing their central nervous system. They're managing their emotions. It's not like they're not having them, because Shakespeare demands that you have them. He allows you to have them. But you can have these big emotional swings and opposites, and you can be angry, then sad, then in love, and sometimes all in the same line, right? And then you take that journey of that monologue. The late Dennis Krosnick used to say, Shakespeare's sonnets and monologues are like a journey into madness. And if you take the journey, it will take care of you. And when you come out different. And that's what the veterans were finding, just like I found. And we began to formulate this into what we called DeCruit. Really, Alicia Ali made it DeCruit what it is today, but we can get to that if we have time. But anyway, so that's what we were finding in LA. That became the beginnings of it. Oh, the reason I brought my wife into it is because she came and saw me rehearsing with them. That's how we rehearsed for the big plays. Was we took single monologues and they would write about it. And what they would do is they would perform for a small invited protective audience. They would, just like I did for Cry Havoc, they would read their personal piece seamlessly into Shakespeare. And then we'd have a discussion. And my wife is like, that's way more powerful than doing the whole play. Like, I get the whole play. It's lovely. It's, it's noteworthy. It's really quite awesome. But that's where the medicine is. So that became what we focused on.
How many veterans have gone through this with you, would you guess?
Hundreds have formally gone through it, because Alicia Ali from NYU Steinhardt approached us because my wife and I moved back to New York then with our DeCruit. By then it had become DeCruit, the program and the nonprofit. And she approached us. She found out about our work, and we were small, so the fact that she did it was incredible. And said, "I want to study this. I want to work with you, and you'll be co-author." Which who does that in academia? Like no one. And she said, "I know we gotta. It's going to take us like 2 years to figure out how we even measure it. But if you're up for it, I would like to work with you and find a way to measure what you're doing, because we already knew anecdotally, like that it was powerful. I experienced it. We've seen all these, so many veterans. I'd started working in rehabilitation centers, incarceration centers, prisons and jails, transition centers, and with the veterans in those populations or in those settings. And then it was so successful that like the wardens were saying, "Well, will you do it for the general population?" So we knew it worked, but we didn't know why or how to measure it or how to get data. But Dr. Ali came and said, "I know how to." And so she and I sat down for a couple of years and formalized DeCruit and then manualized it and measured it. And we do heart rate variability. Her husband came in and did EEGs on a certain number.
Wow.
We also do self-disclosure surveys of PTSD, depression, self-efficacy. I think there's one more, but I know those three for sure. And hundreds have gone through that. But in total, I've worked with thousands of veterans at this point.
On the measuring part, what was the conclusion?
It works. It's more efficacious than placebo, and it's more efficacious than antidepressants in the depression realm. And its efficacy was, as they say, statistically significant. It was remarkable. We've been written up. We have over 20 peer-reviewed journal articles. We have, I don't even know how many, probably close to a dozen articles written about us. We've contributed something like 8 chapters to different books on our work and our findings and our data. I say we, but tip of the hat to Dr. Ali, who takes my ramblings and her knowledge and her research and makes it a comprehensive, cogent, readable piece
Right.
of writing. But yeah, it's efficacious in multiple realms. But one of the things that and I say we know, but the reality is we think we know, right? Because we know so little about the brain, but we know more than we did. But we understand that there are a lot of things better than we used to through brain imaging, for other reasons. But one of them is the communication between the spheres is vitally important. And the corpus callosum is what actually communicates from one sphere to the other. And we know, among other things, that for PTSD, that communication is interrupted. And one of the things we found in the EEGs is that opened up the communication between the two. After a mere 24 hours, by the way, we work a total of 24 hours with the veterans over 8 weeks. We meet once a week for 3 hours a week. That's it. So imagine if we could get them, my dream would be like a 4.5 month model where we're residents, like we're working all day long together and eating together and everything. But yeah, it also increases the communication, reduces the activity of the amygdala. It allows you to convert the traumatic re-experiencing into a memory. It turns it into something that I recall happening. So it severely diminishes and sometimes eliminates. We don't say in DeCruit trigger points or to be triggered, because of obvious reasons. It's a different connotation for us and a problematic word. So we say activation. But the activation level goes down to a more manageable level. It helps mitigate not just the symptoms, but the overall impact of depression, PTSD, self-efficacy. And what we found in sort of the latter years is it also improves attachment insecurity. If you're an attachment theorist, if you're not, I understand, but I'm an attachment theorist. I believe in attachment theory. I know it's limiting and sort of generalized, but I'm talking.
Explain that. What do you mean?
Mary Ainsworth and John Bowlby was in the mid 1900s, early 1900s, created a theory of attachment. And I'm not going to get this great, even though I'm a theorist, I believe in it. But my best description of it is that they sort of, if you'll forgive the binary, the reductiveness of a binary, that when we're born, we form an attachment to our primary caregiver. So, and I say that because it can't always be the mother, right? If there's adoption or whatever, separation, but the primary caregiver. And that attunement happens through all the different senses, like the smell and the touch, and specifically touch, but also the attunement of eyes. And when they mirror each other, the mirror neurons fire, la, 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 doing baby sounds and playing. And if the infant is responded to in a timely manner, and by timely manner I mean the infant's timely response, it forms a secure attachment, meaning that it trusts that it's safe, that the parent, the primary caregiver, will respond when they're in distress, if they're hungry, if they need to be held, or if they're dirty, right? And then the way that forms is then when they become a toddler and they start moving further away, they can check back in with a parent and they trust that parent's going to respond. So they're daring enough to go around the corner where the parent can't be seen, but know that if they get hurt and they cry out, that primary caregiver is going to respond. An insecure attachment is you don't have that. You're not attuned to. You're not held. You're not cleaned in a timely manner. You're not fed in the time. In my day, from what I understand, they used to say, let them cry it out. Well, it turns out that's the exact opposite of what we should be doing. So the attachment can be repaired at any age. So there's another modality called psychodrama, specifically designed to do attachment repair in adults, and it's effective. And so what we found was, when we took the same parameters as psychodrama, we found that what we were doing with DeCruit really was repairing a lot of that attachment repair. Because, and I don't think I mentioned this, that the thing that I accidentally found out just through talking to veterans, but now has since been studied, is that active service members and military veterans have much higher ACE scores than civilians. ACE scores stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, right? It's this 10-point scale of, were you yelled at, were you hit, were either of your parents not your parents, or had substance use disorder, that kind of thing. And if you have a score of 3 or higher, it's considered toxic stress. Well, the veterans I'm working with, and at this point it had been in the hundreds, that was all of us. It was my score is 7, 8, and all of the veterans I'm working with are like 6 and higher. Some are 9s, 10s, and then I find out that John Hopkins did a study that supports this. Harvard did a study. The DoD and the VA were a part of those studies and found that it's in fact true that we have much higher ACE scores. So what that means is that in addition to the typical transition difficulties from the military, these are also adult survivors of childhood maltreatment, neglect, and abuse that has been yet to be repaired. So we incorporated that as part of our training. It's not just transitioning from the military. We're healing childhood wounds here. And it turns out it works, that the theater, and Shakespeare in particular, does this brilliantly.
So you deal with vets from all ages, right? Crazy how the similarities run through.
Yeah.
Even whether you saw combat or not. I mean,
that's right. So the negative outcomes for veterans transitioning out of the military, we have the 5 that have data. These are all citable resources from the VA, by the way. We have higher incidence of being unhoused or homelessness. We have higher incidence of suicide than civilians, I'm comparing to. Higher incidence of substance use disorder. We used to call it addiction. Higher incidence of domestic violence and interpersonal violence. And according to the Department of Justice, we get harsher, longer jail and prison sentences than civilians. And this is regardless of if you served in combat or didn't serve in combat, if you were, regardless of branch, regardless of what era you joined, wartime or so-called peacetime, which wasn't peacetime, by the way. But yeah, and so I've worked with veterans when I first started it, there were still a good number of World War II veterans around that I worked with, and some Korean War era veterans. Then in New York in New York City in particular, worked with a lot of Vietnam era veterans, but that includes Iraq, Afghanistan, my era. So like from Panama through Mogadishu, including the first Gulf War and Balkans and all that awful shit, and then even since, and then again in peacetime, water purification specialists, clerk typists, and they all of them. It didn't matter. We're struggling with the transition out of the military, and the common denominator, in my opinion, is that childhood trauma.
Have you found older veterans? I feel like a lot of the Vietnam guys that I've talked to talk about how later in life, a lot of things come back a lot stronger.
Yeah.
Nightmares.
Yeah.
Is that true? Have you found that?
I have found that to be true. This is anecdotal evidence and personal experience. Keep in mind that my 10-year mark was roughly 9/11. So, and I lived in New York City when it happened, and I worked in the trade towers as a temp job when 9/11 happened. So I was already struggling. I was already starting to feel crisis come back up again for me. I was hitting a really, I struggle with likely bipolar 2. So I was in one of my depressive pits when that happened. And so when I talk about that, with Vietnam veterans in particular, there was thematic that the 10-year mark was significant. Now, it's not always 10, but around like 8, year 8, year 9, year 11, year 10. So it was, on average, it was kind of year 10. And then when you think about it, Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, right? And so one's about the 10 years of war, and the other one is the 10-year return from war. It takes them 10 years to get back. And it aligned. So, and then a similar thing, it took a while for, right, the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans to have hit the 10-year mark. Unfortunately, we were in it for 2 decades, so we started seeing it while it was still going on. But they were sharing the same thing with me, that for some reason around that 10-year mark, it just becomes more difficult. And then even later, if you don't process it, because most of the Vietnam veterans we worked with had not been in any sort of mental health, at least weren't at the time, any sort of mental health care. Because they were the poor bastards had to just lock it up and stow it away, right? They didn't come back, and they weren't hailed as heroes. They had to pretend they weren't veterans, a lot of them. And so then and that was the other story I heard. So they just locked it away. And they have a wicked, when I say they, I'm generalizing, but the Vietnam veterans I worked with have a wicked, wicked sense of humor. The thing is that I realized that became their protective mechanism, right? That's how they deal with their emotions, is they make jokes about it. But then you start opening that up and saying, well, what would it be like to not laugh at that? Then they start cracking open like they got out, a week ago. But then they heal it. They get the sort of first experience of being brought home. And it's not about parades. It's not about awards. It's not about recognition. It's about being able to speak, or as Shakespeare put it, to speak what we feel and not what we ought to say, to be able to be honest about what their experience was like and what it's like, and the connection to childhood, and, the impact of the draft in their era, and all these things that they couldn't speak. And then to be given the language for it, because Shakespeare, that heightened poetry, they're like, the question is always, how did he know? Like, how did he get it? How did he write that so perfectly? And it's for any experience, being numb from war. For anyone who's a theater person, I'm about to say the name of the Scottish play and the Scottish warrior. In theater, you can't say his name, but I'm going to say it because I'm not superstitious. But Macbeth and Coriolanus, or Coriolanus is the way I prefer to say it, are perfect examples of what we experience in the U.S. military, where they go through years and years of combat and have difficulty transitioning back. And in McBee's case, what undoes him is he kills outside of combat, and it messes him up. And he goes numb. He says, I feel nothing. Meanwhile, his wife feels everything. and she ends up committing, spoiler alert, she commits suicide. And once she's dead, he's like, he just says right to the audience, I'm numb. I don't feel anything, but now my reason for living is gone. And there's nothing more to live for. So he basically commits suicide by combat. And Coriolanus does the same thing. He spends 17 years in combat. And when he comes back, they want him to be a politician and use his words. When what he knows is how to respond to a threat with violence. That's it. That's his response. That's a soldier's response. And now he's got to talk. Well, he fails, of course. And then they banish him. And where does he go? Interestingly enough, to the enemy, because it's the only person he identifies with. In the 80s, there was a study done by a master sergeant. I'm so sorry to the master sergeant. I can't remember his name at the moment. But in the 80s, remember, the Soviets were using ideology-based training, and the U.S. was using camaraderie-based training. Like, don't kill for your country, kill for your brother and or sister to your left and right. You cover their back because they've got your back. That's how you get home. That's the lesson we learned from Vietnam, thanks to the Vietnam veterans from my era. And it's powerful. Well, Shakespeare talks about that exact same thing. But this master sergeant studied that he found that the veterans that he was that he was researching found that they had closer connections to their comrades than they did to their spouses, and often identified with the enemy more than civilians back home. So, and again, Shakespeare, how did he know this? So Coriolanus goes to the enemy and says, I now, here's my throat, kill me because I don't have a home anymore, or use me. I don't care. I'm here, but I've done you. His exact words are, my name is Caius Marcius, who hath done to thee great harm and mischief, who hath done to thee in all the voces great harm and mischief. And then goes on to say that I'm here for whatever you need. And he and Aufidius, his arch nemesis, end up bonding. And in fact, Aufidius, sorry, I'm going on, wrangle me if you need to.
That's all right.
It's just so brilliant because Aufidius then says to Coriolanus or Caius Marcius, he says, know this, I love the wife, I love the maid I married, but to see thee here more beats my rapt heart than when I took my wife across the wedding threshold. That's that research, is that bond. And so so anyways, I'm all over the place, but thank you.
If people want to find out more about what you're doing, how do they get in touch, or how do they find out about that?
So our website is DeCruit.org. It's www.DeCruit. It's spelled just like recruit, but with a D, DECRUIT.org. And our website is under construction, so some of the links aren't, we're literally rehashing it. But yeah, you can find out about when we're doing programming, the research we've done, what we have coming up. We're starting programming again online in the fall, closer to Veterans Day. But yeah,
man, what amazing work you're doing.
Thank you.
That's quite a. Give me a little recap. What are your? I'll just tell you, having talked to a lot of veterans, that story of yours is very familiar. They joined the military, even against the will of their parents. Even if their parents were military, a lot of times their parents were like, I don't want you to join. And they felt disconnected from school or college. And they just felt like directionless maybe. And the military boot camp gave them something, it was like some stern direction. Yeah. And then they went back to school and did really well in school and accomplished things. So that's a really familiar story. And war and military is such an interesting, it's just fascinating. But I'm curious your takeaway now. I mean, clearly you were fast tracking and having a lot of great experiences, and it's really influenced your life. And at some point you started seeing it a different way and pulled away from it. And just what's your takeaway from it now that, how old are you? You 59? How old are you?
I'm 59. Yep, I'm 59. I just got another graduate degree, my MSW, a couple of years ago. But so anyone thinking you're too old to go back to school, go back. You do so much better when you're older. I'm a social worker, so I come from that point of view now as well. I'm an artist and a social worker, so that's, I'm biased towards humanity more than anything else. And my takeaway is, there's a couple. I thank you for asking that. I would say this, that look, the transition difficulty out of the military is historic, and it's pre-American history. We know this, right? The Greeks, the Romans, the indigenous of North America. So we know that's the case, but we also know that it can be dealt with. It's that we choose not to. It isn't a lack of resources or lack of understanding or lack of knowledge. It's a lack of will. It's because we choose not to. If we took a portion of the budget that we spend towards making new weapons, an even remotely comparable portion, we wouldn't have the difficulties. We wouldn't have those negative outcomes that I listed earlier across the board, across decade after decade after decade. We wouldn't. We would at least reduce it. We might not eliminate it, but we would certainly reduce it to at least civilian levels at a minimum. Our research among many other veterans groups prove that. And the other thing I would say is that my takeaway is that there's so much developmental trauma, is what we call it, right? The childhood maltreatment, neglect, and abuse, that not only do I think we should have the same comparable exit as we do entering the military, right? The decruiting, but because it's 8 weeks of basic training, and then there's all that testing and training before basic training. So why couldn't we have at least 8 weeks plus to get back out? And with that, there's transition and there's mental health counseling as a part of it. That's just required. I don't know anyone that's going to get harmed from it, right? I mean, I said that, and I know there are instances of it, but I'm talking overall. Provide mental health care, repairing that attachment, and let's fund it. And the arts.
Has anyone tried to pursue that? Do you know that? Has anyone tried to pursue that to have them address that, or is that? I have spoken to members of TRADOC, Army's Training, Doctrine, and Command Center, and they told me flat out they're aware of the problem, and they agreed with me off the record. Said, we know that this is a problem, we know what the problem is, but it's not our mandate until Congress and or the American people make that a part of the military. There will not be what I'm asking for, which is a comparable, comprehensive national program to exit as there is to enter the military. And then furthermore, I would go ahead. What were you saying? No, it's a shame because they know.
Yeah.
They know.
Yeah.
It's not hidden. They've done enough studies to know. Part of what I've discovered through interviewing vets and why I feel very committed to it is I want people to hear the cost of war and service on men and women who do it. Mm-hmm. It's extensive. I'm not sure the person doing it understands it while they're in it, but there's a cost to it. And I think kind of treating this and fully addressing it head on would be to admit openly something that people want to repress. I feel like the military and everyone, no one really wants to. It's fun when if you win a war or whatever, but no one really wants to talk about the cost. Not even guys who served. Really, most of them don't like to even think about it that much.
No, and absolutely, because there's it's indescribable. Sometimes there might be shame involved from what they did or didn't do. I mean, there's just so many different things. And then, I mean, you brought up the cost. I want to. I know we're
you're good.
well over time.
Good.
I don't even. Okay, so here's my estimates on this. So I talked about the negative outcomes, right? And if you consider the percentage of military veterans that there are and active service members who are struggling with these negative outcomes, and then you consider that on average they have 3.2 family members per household. So you're taking the veterans and then doubling that. And then according to a sociology study, the average American person has at least 2 very close, intimate friends with whom you'd share a secret. So now triple that amount of veterans. And then when you add all that up, it comes out to around 42% of the United States population is directly affected by these negative outcomes from military veterans. And that's even before you get into distant connections, work colleagues, neighbors, community members, whatever, schoolmates, like that. And now you're getting well over 50% directly affected by their suicidality, addiction, homelessness, interpersonal violence, et cetera. So yeah, so it's there. And I'd be remiss if I didn't add the plug of the arts as such an essential component to it, because it is. It's not a nice novelty. It is a necessity. The arts hold the components to the healing that we're talking about that nothing else does. Not pharmacology, and not traditional talk therapy. Not alone, anyways. I mean, there are some pretty radical. EMDR is effective, and EFT, which I'm certified in, but it's not scalable. But the arts is scalable. That's the other thing, right? You could scale that.
In my experience, just in talking to veterans, the ones that have an artistic outlet, I feel like have been able to deal with that, the feelings and the emotions of it a lot easier than the ones who don't. And I think it's because you have a way to offload it somewhere,
That's right. That's exactly
So.
it. Yeah. Yeah. And to survive trauma as a child as well as an adult, you have to be creative to survive it. You have to be able to have a creative, expandable mind and think of other possibilities. And what is the arts but being creative and considering other possibilities, just to name a few, right? So yeah, it is. It's powerful. They used to be interlinked. We separated it. They should be brought back together.
Just out of curiosity, did you miss parts of it when you left?
Yeah.
I can still see that when you talk about it a little bit.
Can you?
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I find one thing too that I've decided: the military is this. It gives you purpose, gives men purpose or people purpose, and you're bonded with somebody in that, and people have each other's backs. And I think part of coming home is really tough because if you were in Vietnam and you're getting shot at and risking your life and you're seeing people die, and then you come home and people are complaining about something that just seems so trivial. It's just, such two different worlds, and it's hard to square those two things up, because your adrenaline and the fear is real over there, and then you come here, and then I don't know. It's been a fascinating journey for me just to actually hear the stories and understand it so much clearer, and it's a lot heavier than I think people ever can imagine, really.
Yeah, I bet. And I hope you take care of yourself, because there's the thing called vicarious trauma is a real thing, and for you,
a little bit.
So is it? Yeah. So thank you for holding the space for our voices, and not only holding the space but presenting it on your platform. But I hope you also take care of yourself in between these interviews, so that because it's being dumped onto you.
It's a little heavy sometimes.
Yeah, I bet it is.
The thing I've learned is I've made such good friends through this. I think veterans in general are a little more skeptical to be open to somebody, but when they open up, they let you in, and that's really a cool place to be. So
yeah. Because you
Stephan,
really
thank you so much, man.
Thank you.
You've led an amazing life. What an interesting journey. My goodness. That's very fun, man.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's it's fun. I didn't really think it would be fun to talk about, but with you, it has been.